Just recently, we got some updates to what's coming next for Starfield officially from Bethesda. While no official dates were given, it's a promising roadmap of where Bethesda is looking in order to continue to improve the game. And for fans of Starfield, very exciting indeed, and I'm happy to see these changes. But it also highlights some of my biggest concerns with modern-day Bethesda and elevates the ones I have in regards to the Elder Scrolls 6, because it's only taken over 2 years in order to start polishing out some areas of this game. Bethesda Game Studios' Tim Lamb gave a bit of a retrospective on his time at Bethesda Game Studios, going back to his work on Oblivion all the way through to Starfield. And I have to say, I really do like to see these developer updates. I think they do a fantastic job of highlighting not only the hidden talent behind many of these games, but also the passion that goes into creating them. I think it's very easy to look at, say, Fallout 76 or Starfield and go, Bethesda doesn't really care anymore. They're cashed out. You look at some of the employees who have left and say none of the old talent is there anymore, which isn't 100% true. There's still a lot of the developers that worked all the way back to Morrowind. Tim Lamb, Brian Chapin, Matthew Carfano, Dan Lee, Ashley Cheng. These are all directors, art leads, quest designers that have been there between Morrowind to Fallout 3 and are still at Bethesda. And additionally, we know Bethesda tries to hire people who have in the past made mods for their games. There's two in particular, Stephanie Zachariadis and Ryan Johnson, who were the lead quest designer and the level designer on Fallout London respectively, that are now officially full-time employees at Bethesda Game Studios. So meaning that these folks have a lot of passion to the titles and the projects that Bethesda works on. But Tim Lamb specifically, he says several things that are exactly what I want to hear. Other things I listen to, and I just gotta think that it seems as though Bethesda is sort of a victim of their own ambition, and it's admirable that they want to try to do as much as they do with their games, but it's leading them to become very fragmented. And we'll talk about why I think ultimately this does more harm than good. So Tim starts out by saying, Starfield really is a culmination of every other Bethesda game. And in some ways, it absolutely is. You take the backgrounds from, for example, Fallout New Vegas. I know that was Obsidian, but it's a Bethesda IP. You take dialogue, specifically the persuasion system inspired by Oblivion, the gunplay of Fallout 4 and improved upon, the go anywhere mentality that, see that mountain, you can climb it. They work to varying degrees of success, right? I think you can certainly say the RPG mechanics were a distinct step up and a course correction from what Bethesda tried to do in Fallout 4. That was good. The dialogue was also an improvement, although maybe a little bit too much nonsensical rambling at times, but overall I think it was a distinct improvement. Certain other areas, such as the exploration, I would say was much more of a downgrade. He continues to say that Starfield does all of these things but 4 times as much, and that's really part of the issue for a lot of players, right? You have 4 times the amount of space to go explore, but 4 times less the amount of things to actually see in those places. He specifically states that it feels as though it's 4 games in one. You have going around and shooting aliens and fighting spacers and that sort of thing. You have flying around in your spaceship, building the spaceship is sort of its own game, and then building outposts is sort of its own game. And Starfield, as a result, myself included in this, many people feel as though it was completely disjointed and none of these individual elements were necessarily that compelling or exciting to take a part of. Because there's always a trade-off, right? You can't just say, hey, we're going to do this awesome on-the-ground exploration, but then we're also going to do this space combat system with a whole slew of encounters in space, because now you're dividing 50% for the ground encounters, 50% on the space encounters. Then you also say, we're going to be doing this full-on RPG with factions and quest lines. So now you do 33% here, 33% here, and 33% because you need the writers to be doing things across all of those different departments. Well, in the game, they're meant to be intertwined. You only have a finite number of resources in game development, and you need to prioritize where you're going to spend them. The inevitable result of this is what I think we're experiencing in this sort of phase, this era of Bethesda Game Studios, is that you need to appeal to the people who have grown to like certain systems like the Outpost building. When it comes to Elder Scrolls 6, they're looking forward to the possibility of making entire castles and villages and that sort of thing. And then there's a community that doesn't want anything to do with that. So you have to make each of these systems independent from one another to not step on any toes. Then what it eventually leads to is, because you have a bunch of systems that are in the game but could be further developed, is what we're seeing now, as Tim Lamb confirms that you are going to see free updates and features that players have been asking for. They're going to make changes to the space gameplay. They have a whole team dedicated to the space gameplay and making travels feel more rewarding. And there's also new game systems and a few other, quote, smaller delights. And that's on top of a brand new DLC that, at least so far, is speculated to be releasing sometime in 2026 alongside the PlayStation 5 version of Starfield. So Tim Lamb basically confirms what we had been hearing from some data mining that was done a little while ago, that more or less confirmed we were probably going to see not necessarily planets being able to go from space to the ground, but more so interplanetary travel between planets that are in the same system. And I think this is where the DLC is really going to heavily lean on. I'll be talking more about that at the end of this video, but it's a lot of cool updates. And on top of that, having encounters that can take place while you're traveling between these two locations. So I imagine something like a No Man's Sky system, but you can somehow get interrupted as you're zipping your way from planet to planet to make it a little bit more engaging versus just hitting a button and then sort of waiting till you get there. And these are all great updates to me, right? Anybody who knows my channel or has been around on my channel understands I don't want to just sit here and talk about why Bethesda game sucks or why Starfield is trash. I always try to be a little bit more critical, a little bit more analytical about my approach, about why certain things work, and try to explain why certain audiences feel one way and others feel another. But this is becoming a bit of a habit for Bethesda Game Studios, and it's one that makes me very nervous, almost like they're living in this 2017 era, like when No Man's Sky came out, and just every game that released sort of had this lens on of, we can release a title now and we could just fix it later because we know we're going to continue to get this audience back. Bethesda themselves has experience with this. When you look at Fallout 76, or before that, Elder Scrolls Online, both of which, as we know, launched pretty poorly and have since very much turned around, to the credit of both of those games. It's a wonderful thing to see. Both of these titles repeated the same patterns of releasing with these overambitious promises and half-baked systems that didn't necessarily flesh out as well as it does. And maybe that just makes sense for Bethesda Game Studios at this stage. I don't know, I don't work there, and I don't have any inside information, but maybe because their team size has grown so much, this is what works. The last number that we heard was in 2023, where around 250 developers out of the 450 to 500 working at Bethesda were still on Starfield. Now, if I had to put a bit of a guess, I would say that number has since shrunk. It might be 190, or at the bare minimum, maybe 150 people that are still working on Starfield. But to put things into perspective, it was only 200 developers that worked on Fallout 76. It was 150 developers that worked on Baldur's Gate 3. And don't get me started about the amount of nuance and choice in that game. So fully possible that Bethesda just releases these titles and says, hey, we can have a team to continue to support this game post-launch. So let's get all of this functionality here, and then we'll continue to update it throughout. We're going to flesh out the ground elements. We're going to flesh out the space systems. We're going to build out the settlement building, all in phases, because we have a dedicated team that can continue to live up to this 10-year plan that Bethesda is starting to try to integrate into how their games are made. And that's based on a quote from Todd Howard himself. And it's the exact opposite of what has made both their own titles, Elder Scrolls Online as well as Fallout 76, successful now. Fallout 76 in particular became as popular as it is after Wastelanders launched. You had a complete feeling experience that revisited and reworked how the core design of the game would flow, and every update that has come out since for Fallout 76 has been based around the framework that Wastelanders introduced. And what all of this ultimately says to me is Elder Scrolls 6 needs to choose what it wants to be. Is it going to be the open world fantasy RPG? Great. then focus in on that. It can't also be the pirate ship building simulator and the castle building and the kingdom ruling simulator, as well as whatever other new things that Bethesda's going to try to throw into the game. They need to decide, we're going to launch this game, it's going to be a great open world fantasy RPG, and once we get that down, maybe as an expansion we decide, you know what? During the main campaign, a lot of castles did get destroyed, so what if we expand the game more and have all the castles you can rebuild, restore them, you could rule over them, you make judgments, and you levy taxes from your people, and they have a happiness system, and that way you get a complete experience, and then for people who like the building, they get a complete experience, and everyone is happy. And most importantly, we're not waiting over 2 years to get the full game that we were hoping it would release as, which is exactly what's happening with Starfield. Starfield released in September of 2023. It's going to be 2026 before we finally get these enhancements to the space travel system, which is something that a lot of players have been asking for since day one. Why not just avoid that problem from the start? And the issue is, as we highlighted before, that Bethesda sort of wrote themselves into this corner. Because you damn well know, even if Bethesda promises, we're going to make 2 systems, one is going to come after launch, but they're both going to be so much more fleshed out than if we tried to do them both from the get-go, people will lose their collective minds. If Bethesda does not release Elder Scrolls 6 with some kind of settlement or building system in the game, people will be screaming their heads off that they've cut content. And if they especially say they're going to sell it in later, people are going to have a real problem. Again, even if it means they're getting a better end product as a result. Damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? So ultimately, will any of these fixes make the game better for folks who have been turned off by Starfield but are actually willing to go back in and give it a fair shake? Probably not. There's a certain element to this game, there's a certain flow to it that I just don't think resonates with a lot of folks, and a lot of that comes down to having the openness. Do I think that this DLC and these improvements will enhance the experience? 100%. And what I ultimately feel as though is with this DLC, it's going to release possibly in a small singular contained system that takes advantage of the best parts of all of these mechanics, including the new ones that will come for free in the updates, right? So you will be incentivized to fly between planets in the system while getting unique encounters for doing so. And when you land there, because there's fewer planets, they're going to feel more fleshed out, which makes you want to use the buggy that they introduced as a free update to the game. So I think a lot of people might sit back, experience this if they give it a fair try, and say, okay, I understand now what they were trying to go for. I understand what the vision was. And like Far Harbor for many people, they'll look at it as the best part of Starfield, even if the rest of the experience wasn't as good as they hoped it would be. And it doesn't mean that I'm not hoping for the best, and it doesn't mean that I'm not excited to see what these changes are going to be, but ultimately I'm more curious to see how it might reflect on the direction Bethesda is going to try to take the Elder Scrolls 6. But that will do it for me. Let me know, are you looking forward to these updates? What are you hoping to see from them? And do you think that Starfield can be fixed if you're someone who doesn't like the game? Let me know down in the comment section below. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please do leave a like, consider subscribing, and as always, I hope to see you all next time. So long, everybody.